Welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which this podcast is recorded, the Bunurong people of the Kulin Nation. We pay our respects to their leaders past, present and emerging. The Understanding Boys podcast is a series of conversations exploring what it is to be a good man these days. And if you had a story that you could tell a boy of say 14 and he'd listen, what would that story be? And that's really what I'm asking our guests today. I'm Dr. Ray Swan, and we're a community of teachers and parents concerned with the education and growth of boys and young men in the modern world. This series is brought to you by Brighton Grammar, an all-boys school in Melbourne. To learn more about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. In today's podcast, I speak with Raelene Plozza. Raelene is someone I've known for some years, both as a teacher and colleague. She's unbelievably passionate about literacy. So that's everything to do with reading, writing and speaking. And in our conversation, we talk about some key tips for parents about how to improve literacy for boys, what to do if things aren't going as you might think, and also what's really important, what's important to focus on. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast. So joining us today on the Understanding Boys podcast is a friend of mine, a great teacher, someone who I've been dying to talk to actually, and super pleased that she can be with us today. Raelene Plozza, welcome to the Understanding Boys podcast, Raelene.
Thank you very much, Ray. I love the podcast and I feel very honoured to have been invited to participate.
Oh, you're too kind. Let's thought I'd start with a literary quote, Dylan Thomas. Let's begin at the beginning. One of the reasons I was very keen to chat to you was, I think, and it's true for myself, even as an English teacher, that particularly in those early years about learning about how to read, learning how to write, sort of seems like it's a bit like magic in a way, isn't it? How do you sort of associate sounds with symbols? How do you get started? I thought, it would be fantastic for people for parents at least, to sort of have a bit of an understanding about that sort of first part of your exposure to literacy, so reading and writing and speaking. How do teachers start to make those connections?
Well, I guess we probably should start with what happens before the boys get to school or the students get to school, because really that all starts from the day that they're born. And the learning to read and the learning to write is all about connecting the visual, so what they see on paper, the text, to the oral, what they hear, and then the oral. And it's about making those connections. And right from the very start, all of this is very much influenced by what they see others doing and how they see others engaging in text. So babies, when they're hearing sounds and then making their first sounds, they are the first steps for reading. And I guess that is something that perhaps I didn't even know when I first started teaching, and even when I had young children, because a lot of this just comes naturally and they develop through these stages naturally. But what we've found as teachers is that if they don't have a strong foundation in literacy, it can cause all sorts of issues as they get older.
So one of the things I was interested in that, Raelene, was, so I'm sort of imagining that a home that has a good relationship with reading and writing. So does that mean the parents are reading and writing? Are they being read stories to it? Is it sort of some of that old-fashioned stuff?
Absolutely. So we know that the more that a child is read to, the stronger their early literacy will be. And also we know that reading has such a powerful influence throughout life. And if they see the people that they love reading, they're more inclined to do it. So a household that's full of books, where parents are reading all the time to their children, but also where children see their parents engaging in reading on a regular basis, sets a really strong foundation.
With the kids that are in that really early pre-primary years, I know there's sometimes in the literature and just in schools that I've worked in, that there's sometimes a tension around, their sort of 3-4-year-old, we want them to play, versus their 3-4-year-old, we want them to start to be able to hold a pen and identify what some of the letters are. And I imagine that there's like really strong and good arguments either side. What do you think are the keys for parents in that space? Should they be doing the flashcards and learning the letters and all that sort of stuff? Or what do you think?
No. This podcast can't be about the reading wars, but no, that play, that singing nursery rhymes and clapping games and things like that, that is early reading and writing. And it doesn't seem to be, and that's where that tensions come from. Sure, we can actually teach them to write their letters when they're, in ELC, for example, but it's what they're missing if we jump to that stage before they're ready. So yes, they need to see books and have books read to them, and they need to learn things like which way is up and down for the book, and they need to know what a word is. That you can point to them and tell them that this is a word, and you can show them which way you're reading. All of those things, that's great, but they need to. I guess there's some really important things that they need to develop in that preschool stage. A really important one is to be able to identify individual sounds. So things like, let's go for a walk around the kitchen because we're in lockdown at the moment, and let's find everything that we can see that starts with a s sound, and so they find the sieve. So those kinds of things, they're really, really important. And also, I guess, the development of vocab. So lots of talking. If in an ELC setting, if we take the boys out and we set up a pirate ship and we do all of that, we need the students to be telling us stories and hearing stories about that. Lots and lots of words, but definitely not writing and trying to read at that stage. It's really important that the play happens, but there's so much language in play. But also, Ray, I need to say that they also need to identify, this is something that they learn. They learn that text has a meaning. It doesn't just come naturally. So, I mean, it's a terrible analogy, but, all kids seem to see those golden arches, the big M, and they draw a conclusion that that's McDonald's, or they learn that that's McDonald's. And so they learn that signs have a meaning and a message, and so it's really important to show them written words, but that's about as far as it needs to go. They need to know that print gives them a message, will tell them something.
And I think one of the things that I do know about those early years of literacy is that it's really important that kids can identify within a word the different kinds of sounds that are happening within a word as well. Can you tell the parents why that's also important, which might seem a little strange in a way? It doesn't mean we all need to be the most perfect enunciators of words necessarily, but kids need to have a really strong sense of a word, that there are different sounds within that word.
Yeah, absolutely. So we jump ahead to when they learn to read, and really this is what we start doing when they get to school. They need to match the letters. So this is phonics. When you're talking about the phonics, you hear about that. They need to match letters or letter combinations to each individual sound. That's the code, really, of reading and writing. And so that's going to be ineffective if they can't hear the individual sounds in a word. And I think this is something that got lost when that tension you were talking about before of getting students reading and writing earlier. We skipped that stage. So in nursery rhymes, knowing that, or any rhymes, knowing that a word, the word cat is very similar to the word rat, it's just that initial sound is really important for them to develop. So when they learn to read, what we do is we actually give them, we match up the letters to the sounds that they're hearing. And that phonemic awareness that I'm talking about doesn't come naturally, and it does need to be taught, and you need to sort of isolate the different sounds within a word. And I know I run training sessions with adults on this, and people really struggle with it. So it is actually a skill to isolate, and there's lots of games. It's very fun to sort of manipulate the sounds in a word. So, you can play a game with your your 4-year-old, you might say, the cat sat on the mat, and then you might say, okay, let's get rid of the in mat and change it to a P. And so they'll say, the cat sat on a pat, and you'll have lots of laughing. But those kinds of just like fun games where they manipulate the sounds will really help them when they start to read and write.
When you were talking earlier, you were saying about the importance of vocabulary and knowing, more words and building those words, and knowing that some words, seem to fit with some things and maybe don't fit or have different sorts of uses. We see that a lot, don't we? And we'll talk in a little bit about sort of secondary piece, but just how important actual, the context is and the words that are in that context for kids to be able to write and think in a way. I mean, are you someone who would advocate, using bigger words with younger kids as well? Like, sometimes we have that thing with, as parents, where we might, dumb down's probably too strong, but we kind of have a simplistic way of talking to young kids. But should we actually be challenging with newer and bigger words?
Absolutely, as long as they have the context or the meaning of the word. I mean, wordplay is just so much fun. Little kids love nothing more than learning a big word and finding out what it means and then playing and exploring. And that's a really fun way of building vocab. But I think they need all of the words to explain what's going on in their world at that time. And the only way they'll build those words is if you have a discussion around it. And if you think of vocab as background knowledge, it makes sense that when they're reading a book, when they're at school, in grade 2, and they come across a word that they've experienced, then they're going to be more likely to be able to look at the picture, look at the sounds and the words, and quickly, it's all about speed, work out what that word is. But if they've never experienced it, and we'll know this when we'll talk about this when we're talking about the secondaries, if they've never experienced it, it completely limits their comprehension of what they're reading.
Yeah, and then I guess there's a whole overlay here, isn't there, about culture? Because if you're, as a learner and a reader, if you're reading in a culture, there's a whole lot of cultural reference points. I remember early in my teaching career, doing the classic, Melbourne Aussie rules references to a bunch of kids, and just realising actually some of these kids just don't understand what it means to be like kicking it out of bounds or something, which is a very AFL sort of reference. Yeah.
Absolutely. I've got a recent, hilarious story, because I was very fortunate to have been taking an EAL class during the first stage of lockdown, and I'd never taught EAL before, even though I have studied it and know a fair bit about it. But the actual teaching of these boys, and I had a group of boys, they were all Chinese boys, and I brought in a cartoon that we were going to use as a writing prompt. Well, actually 2. One of them was like a surfer in Byron Bay, and I referred to him as a hippie, and they all just looked at me blankly. Yeah. And so I went on to explain to them what a hippie was. It wasn't part of their vocab. And then the second cartoon had this sort of dude with a man bun. He was a barista, and he was hiding behind, I can't remember what was happening, but he was hiding behind his desk. And I said, and he's a hipster. And they're like, so he's a hippie, he's a surfer. And I'm like, no, big difference between a hippie and a hipster. And so we had the most hilarious English lesson that probably went for far too long, but all around that colloquial vocab. It was hilarious.
One of our prep teachers, Samara, was telling me about one of the boys that was rather cross coming back from chapel and frustrated that there was no lasagna, and she had to ask him why. What do you mean lasagna in chapel? She just couldn't put it together. But one of the hymns that he'd been singing was "Sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna, sing Hosanna to the King of Kings," and he was singing "Sing lasagna," and just sort of waiting for
we all do
the golden lasagna moment. Heading into recess.
I'll never be able to sing that hymn the same way again.
That's right. Yeah, it is amazing, isn't it? When we, when you hear and mishear things, and just again, it's so clear, isn't it? When you think of it like that, how context is everything in giving us the vocabulary to help us to be able to read and make sense and find our own voice. Because ultimately, as we'll no doubt talk about, one of the keys to literacy is being able to find your own voice and being able to express who you are in the world and to help you know, and this podcast obviously focuses on boys and young men, but for everyone to be able to go out into the world and, you know, to say something and make a positive contribution. And you really do need to be literate to be able you know, to do that really effectively. If I'm a parent of someone in lower primary, so, you know, prep 1, 2, what are some of the main kind of key milestones that you'd be looking at if you're assessing, you know, someone, so as a parent, I'm sitting there thinking, can my son, what should he really be able to do in those sort of early years in terms of literacy?
Yeah, well, definitely the first sign I would look for is being able to hear those sounds within words, and you can very quickly, you know, test that out. And the boys use, you know, their fingers to identify the individual sounds. But it's really important. I guess one of the things I should have mentioned is, you know, the English language is a little confusing in that we have 44 sounds but only 26 letters. And the way we used to teach phonics, when I first started teaching, which is a very long time ago, we taught that each letter made one sound and everything else was an exception. And it's so wrong to teach that way, because quite often a letter makes, you know, 3 or 4 sounds, and more often than not, it's a combination of letters that make a sound. So that's really important. But hearing the sounds in words is I guess, the first thing first milestone they need to reach. And, you know, even if we go back 10 years, I think we didn't test that milestone. We just assumed that they had it. And I know in my work with year 7 and 8 boys that a lot of them can't do that. They need to be taught that at that age, that late age. And then I guess alphabet knowledge. So they need to recognise all the letters of the alphabet. They need to be able to name them, because once we start matching the letters to the sounds, you know, they need to know if we say, you know, use a letter A in that case, they need to know what an A is. And then that matching stage happens at a wonderful sort of prep stage. It's just the most magical year when you talk about magic. Boys come in not being able to read and write, and they leave being able to read books and like little mini chapter books, and to be able to write pages of information. So that, you know, if you ever ask, well, teachers either so fearful of teaching prep, or they'd love to teach it, like I would love to teach prep as a permanent fixture, because it is the most rewarding year. So what they do is they finally draw together that visual. So they're the letters that they know. They can see a P and they know it's a P, the sounds in words, and they combine them together to be able to read a word, work out what an unfamiliar word says, and to write them. And it just all comes into place. So in sort of that prep year, they make that connection, and that's the next milestone. And from there, things get tricky because they all progress at their own rate. And that's why in a primary school, differentiation, being able to group students according to what their next step is really, really important, especially in those sort of early prep to year 2 year levels. But they all get there. And so just because, you know, I think parents get really hung up on what reading level their students at, but I know from experience that just because they're on a really low reading level at the end of prep doesn't mean that they're going to stay there. You know, they could be at the top of the range, you know, in year 1. It just takes them all different times, and they're all different ages. It's not something that you can do. We once thought that, you know, in kinder you learnt this, in prep you learnt that, in year 1 you learnt the next, and that's where problems happened, because we had students, you know, get to grade 6 and they will have missed something, and that's something that teachers talk about. You know, he seems to have missed something along the way. Well, we don't let them miss something along the way anymore. We make sure that we cater to the different speed that they pick these skills up.
Absolutely. And if you're you know, at the grand old age of 5, 6 months is 10% of your life. So, you know, you know, and some of the kids starting are 5 or 6 months older than others within that cohort. So, you know, it is, I think you're right. We like to think of, you know, these stages and it's all clean cut, but actually, and learning is like that. You know, times and developmental things going on, but certainly having that sort of positive regard for learning and that love of games and, talking and stories, I think is just such a rich environment in the home to be able to sort of build that.
And just not rushing it. I really fear for students who are pushed to the next stage because a parent or a teacher thinks they should be there and they've missed that developmental milestone in the meantime. And I think when we look at the students in the secondary school with literacy issues, somewhere along the line, they haven't been given the time to consolidate everything that's happening before that school is the most important literacy development that happens. And we draw it all together with our expertise once they get to school. But, if they grow up in a house where they weren't read to, they're at great risk. If they're not speaking a lot and having conversations, I think they're at risk as well. So those kind of things that people just think, everyday stuff, it's really important to pay attention to how much you're doing it.
Do you think there's a change, we often talk about the change in impact on technology and reading, and mostly as technology being a distractor. I'm not referring here to learning technologies that might promote, and facilitate, in fact, improvements in, in writing. But, as a distractor, I mean, just anecdotally, as a teacher over time, have you seen changes in that space?
Absolutely. It is a huge distractor in the adolescent years that wasn't there when we were growing up. And the battle that we have in the adolescent years is that lives get so very busy, and the changes that are happening in their body also, add to that sort of chaos or, their load, I guess. And what I've found, certainly from reading and my own research, is they still love reading. So parents or teachers make the assumption that they just, they're not into reading when they're adolescents, and it's not that. It's just like reading, but it's just not high enough on the priority list in those years. And one of the things that have knocked it down a level is technology. So, if they're going to choose between getting on a game with friends or reading a book, they're more likely to choose the game. And if that wasn't there, I believe reading would jump up the priority list and be more likely to happen.
So would you be someone who would advocate, at the home, having a time amount per day of reading? Is that something that parents could start with?
Oh, absolutely. So there's a couple of important messages here. One is parents and boys and students need to know the value of reading for pleasure, reading for leisure. That's how I refer to it, reading for pleasure. So wide reading. On top of the reading that they do for school, they need to know the impact that can have on their lives so that they understand the importance of it, but also they need to be motivated and engaged by what they're reading. And I think that's something that we need to attend to as well. But the data tells us quite in a compelling way that those students that perform in the 90th percentile and people with successful relationships tend to be people who read on average half an hour a day for pleasure. So beyond the reading that is required of them in their schooling.
And we think that's possibly true, Raelene, because obviously there's more words. There's more words you can use, and you have a greater range of ways of communicating what's happening for you, and your own, I guess, ultimately might sound a bit grandiose, but communicating the truth of who you are. But I think also something that we know is that we sort of build schema, don't we? And a schema is an idea which is, it's like a pattern. And if we have like literary schemas, or we have schemas of knowledge that are sitting there that have come to us from reading lots of different kinds of books, that can sort of be an accelerator in terms of learning, because you kind of got something to hang an idea to, rather than sort of starting and having to really work hard to, make that connection. You've already got some fertile material that you can start to make some connections to.
Absolutely. I don't. I can't recall who said that a reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies, but basically for me, it's all about living the experience of the characters in a book, or I guess you've also got the obvious of learning from reading sort of non-fiction, reading for information. But for me, I think. And this is just a personal belief, I think it's more about the fiction and learning to appreciate different perspectives. I mean, I see it happening all the time. Like with every novel that we study, that I study with students, I see their belief system tested. I see them open their mind to, other people's beliefs, things that they didn't believe in the first place, and learn to, I guess, walk in the shoes of other people. I mean, it's like, you can read a book and it's as if you've travelled to another country, or it's as if you've lived in another time, because I truly believe that if you connect with the book and if you jump into the book, that you experience everything the character experiences. So if you have characters in a book who are challenged and they have to solve a problem, you learn from that problem solving. So you don't actually have to live through that yourself. You can live through it in a book. I know that at the moment we're in Year 8, we're studying The Giver, and the boys have made strong correlations between living through the pandemic as we are and this sort of dystopian future. Because, I've studied this book with students before and they've never drawn that parallel. These boys this year, they understand how that kind of future could be possible, where a community is completely controlled by rules to protect the existence of the human race. And it's just mind-blowing. The Year 8, and it's just beautiful, wonderful.
That is extraordinary, isn't it? I know, in teaching some of the old stories as well to the primary school boys, what their capacity to see beyond the sort of literal interpretation of a story and, what happens, so the plot, but then actually to personalise it and actually sort of somehow on an inner level actually engage with it, and whether it's developing a new understanding or whether it's empathy or even if it's just purely a sort of a knowledge thing, like, oh, wow, like that's where Istanbul is, and and so on. It is extraordinary, isn't it?
It is, Ray, and I think it's something that we can actually enhance their ability to do that as well, and that would be a key message for parents is when you're reading with your son, and I think that should happen well beyond those early years, the ability to have a conversation around what you're reading, what you've read together is really, really important. And that inferential comprehension doesn't come easily. They naturally will retell the story and tell you the facts, what colour was the boy's dog, that kind of thing. But to ask them questions like, why do you think the boy did that? Or what would you do if that was you? And then I guess in the older years we ask, why do you think the author did that? Why did the author use those words, or why did he use that situation? What is he trying to get you as a reader to believe or think about? So that inferential comprehension that you're talking about, that our junior school boys are really good at, we spend a lot of time trying to enhance their skills in that area.
Yeah, and parents may not be too clear on what that term is. So can you just break that down just a little bit? So inferential. Or the opposite is literal. So literal is literally what happened in the book, but inferential is being able to relate what happened in the book to you, to real life, to your life. So those types of questions. I wonder why. I love that. I think all parents should try and use that to guide a book discussion in primary school. I wonder why he did that, or I wonder why that didn't work. And so the students think beyond what happened in the book. So they make inferences. Well, if that happened, then this might happen. So things like predicting what might happen next, or predicting what could have happened if something changed in the book. But most importantly, what you're talking about is relating it to themselves. If you were in that situation, when have you been in a situation where you felt that way? Really helps them to understand what's going on in the text. And it's one of the areas it's often assessed, isn't it, in literacy assessments, is being able to infer meaning from a text or from a sentence or from a paragraph and sort of, as you say, make a prediction or understand what might be happening between the lines, so to speak.
Well, and you and I both know that in the secondary years, that's what it's all about. We're analysing the text and we're seeing beyond the text and reading between the lines. So we're setting the junior school boys up to be able to do that when they get to the secondary school. So it is really important. Once they start thinking that way, it opens up another door. It's all about opening a new door along the way. But initially, they'd much prefer just to tell you the details in the text. And that's, I guess, when you're talking about developmental milestones, when they're reading, one of the first things they can do is retell what happened in the story. So tell me what happened in that story. Tell me again the story. And they can do that. And that's kind of the first step of comprehension. The next step is to remember particular details, so that literal comprehension. And that third step for the junior years is that inferential comprehension. So can they answer questions beyond what was written in the text?
So we're jumping into the secondary, and one of the projects I know you worked on a couple of years ago now, and often at secondary, we've been talking a lot about literacy for life, really. In the secondary space, often at a school level, it's literacy equates to English, which we know is not actually really true. Like, literacy goes across everything because it's how we communicate, how we read, how we speak, and so on. A project that you ran a couple of years ago was in a chemistry. I think was it year 12 chemistry class, or was it year 11?
Yes,
yeah.
Year 12.
What's a reading coach doing in a year 12 chemistry class?
Well, I've got to say, it was the teacher, Patrick, who was passionate about enhancing the outcomes of his chemistry students, and he believed strongly that some of the barriers that they were up against were because they didn't have the literacy required for chemistry, and this is a perfect example of where that thinking about literacy is the job of the English department is so false, because an English teacher can't teach the literacy of a specific subject like chemistry. They can teach them to summarise and to find, the detail in text, for example, but there are specific literacy skills required for each subject area. So what we found out that we started by looking at their assessment tasks, and Patrick was saying that they don't seem to understand the questions, and what we concluded was that the vocab in the questions they didn't really understand. So I'm trying to think of an example. I think one of them was discuss the difference between the data or something like that. It was written in a particular way, and their perception of discuss was what yours and mine is. It wasn't what it needed to be. Discuss meant you need to provide all the reasoning behind why these things are different, but the boys didn't understand it. And so what we did was we grabbed a whole heap of sort of directional vocabulary like discuss and explain, and we taught them those words explicitly. So we explored them, like what does it mean in chemistry? And that, I think, Patrick definitely found helped the students, and he then went on to share that experience with all of the science teachers at BGS. So they all started teaching the specific vocab, but it's not just vocab. There's, styles of writing, and reading in particular requires a lot of vocab work in the sciences, because I've looked at some of the text that they need to read and I don't understand a word of it. I would need you to, as a teacher, explain a lot of the vocab for me to comprehend the text.
Such a great example, Raelene, and it really illustrates the challenge, of secondary and then into life, which is, very much based in how important vocabulary and context are. A lot of those operational terms, and we're recording this in Victoria, which has an assessment system where those operational terms can mean different things. So evaluate in one subject can actually mean something a little bit more technical in another subject, which is quite outstanding. But again, I guess it points to a body of literature or thinking that supports an evaluation. So evaluation in drama versus evaluation in accounting. It's similar words, but they're the same word, but they have different meanings actually.
Absolutely. I wish I could recall it, but there is a word that has caused our teachers a lot of tension because it means the complete opposite in an English class to what it does in a science class. But when I thought about that, I thought how confusing for our students to have to learn the literacy of each subject, but they really do. And I think in the past, our teachers in those other curriculum areas have not really paid much attention to teaching the literacy of their subject, and I think that's something that we've really transformed. And I think for the betterment of our boys, because you can't just assume that they have that knowledge; they don't.
I think a good example is illustrate. Am I actually going to do a drawing for you, or do you want me to actually use words to illustrate? So, there are a number.
Yeah,
definitely,
absolutely.
It's been fantastic to speak with you, Raelene. I always feel like I learn more every time we talk. And I guess before we sort of hit round the bend with the final two questions, I had one other question, which was something I know as an English teacher that I've found hard to know what to do always in this space. And if I'm, say, the parent of a boy who's in that middle to late secondary, so around sort of 14, 15, he's still not reading and writing well, what are some of the, recovery or interventions that can go into helping someone of that age to kind of, right the ship and get back into, a healthy literacy and ultimately a healthy expression of who they are?
Yeah, that's a really big question. And I want to just say reading is the answer because it truly is. So the first thing that I would say is if your son is not reading, then he needs to be, because quite often, we'll have a parent come and say, his spelling is dreadful, and so I want you to give me a program, or I want you to, I want something to work on his spelling. And whilst we can do that, I feel it's counterproductive if he's not reading. So reading influences, it strongly influences their spelling and their writing and their grammar and their oral communication, everything. So that has to be the starting point. And that, brings up all the challenges of engaging them with reading and, as we discussed before, perhaps limiting screen time and explaining to them that positive impact that reading can have on, I don't want to always talk about academic outcomes, but that is something that really motivates them at that age. But also they love nothing more than knowing that they're going to be a good bloke and a reader. I could almost guarantee someone who reads is going to have all these great relationship attributes as well. So reading, you've got to have reading in place. And then if the reading is in place, and unfortunately, it's a bit of a there's a researcher called Stanovich, and he talks about the Matthews effect, and it is basically the more they read, the stronger their literacy, the more likely they're to read, and it's the rich get richer and the poor get poorer scenario. So I think earlier intervention is always going to be my priority, but intervention, I think, if they are reading, or if the reason they're not reading is because they can't access the literature because their literacy is so low, then intervention, and that needs to be one-on-one. And I guess the other thing is motivation. So I'm all for clarity. I explain to my boys why it's important to be a good writer and why it's important to be a good reader in ways that they can connect to. Play them Paul Kelly's How to Make Gravy and they'll just love that story, and just say, you can be a songwriter. That's the kind of thing that turns them on at that age. You could be a rapper, but you need to be able to write. And so it's a complex answer, and I could say so much more, but I think reading, and parents will roll their eyes and grimace. Reading is the answer. It has to be in place first before anything else.
What is it to be a good man these days, Raelene?
Well, that is such a good question. And yeah, I don't want to approach it in a judgmental way and say this is a good man and this is not a good man. But I'm looking at the men in my life, and I feel that they're different to the men that I grew up with. And I think what is making them a better man or a happier man or a more content man is that they're very comfortable with who they are. And I think one of the biggest problems that I see, and this is definitely improving, is society's expectation of what a good man is not always a sound starting point. So I think a good man is just going to be who he wants to be rather than who society expects him to be. So things like, the traditional idea of men being risk takers and breadwinners and tough and not showing their emotions, I think that's really changed. The men in my life, and I've always had probably as many, if not more, male friends than female friends. I think, and I have a son and a husband and a brother-in-law and a dad. I'm lucky. They are all very comfortable with who they are. And I think as parents and teachers, we can go a long way to encouraging them to be who they want to be rather than who traditionally society has expected them to be. The two qualities I think that I admire most in men are empathy, so being able to walk in someone else's shoes, see someone else's perspective and not my way or the highway, and integrity. And I think, acknowledging when you've made a mistake and being honest and trustworthy are things that I think are very worthwhile attributes of a good man.
And if you had a story that you could tell a 14-year-old and he'd listen, and I suspect he would, knowing having been in your classes, by hook or by crook, what would the story be?
Well, firstly, I have 14-year-olds who listen to my stories on a daily basis. I'm so lucky. I don't know if they're listening because they're interested or just because they respect me as a teacher, but I share stories with them all the time. But there is one story that I think you've probably heard before and that I do tell my students in the early part of the year when we're building relationship and I want them to know who I am, but I also always like to have a bit of a moral behind my story I'm trying to teach them, is about my passion for running and how that came about, and it's all linked with growth mindset. And so the story starts with a year 4 class, and I think it was 6 years ago, so they're our current year 10s. And we were teaching them about growth mindset. And I said, we had a class blog, and for that term I said, I want you all to just find something that you truly believe you can't do and that you're not good at, and let's put effort and time into it and see if growth mindset, we're testing it scientifically. And I hadn't thought about this beforehand, but one of the boys said, what's something that, is there anything that you think that there's no way that you could possibly do? And the answer was, for me, running. And I think this is, influenced by a number of things, engendered social, practice of girls weren't runners when I grew up. I mean, I was that girl at the back of the cross-country course gossiping with their friends and walking at the back and laughing and just, doing a few token runs when the teacher looked. And although I played a lot of sport growing up, it was for social reasons, not for sort of physical reasons. But anyway, so I said to the boys, I can't run, and I actually don't think I will be able to. I'm not a runner, and I felt very strongly that you were either born a runner or not. So anyway, I went about taking up running, and the first time I went for a run, I ran from my front doorstep to the corner, and I just nearly died. I was just so puffed, and I really hated it, but because we were doing this project in the class and the boys were really into it and the parents got into it, their house Mrs. was going with their running and I run, and, they were sending me songs to play on my iPod while I was running. And anyway, I did learn to run, and it was just effort and time. And even though I probably, didn't have the physique of a runner, I soon developed, and I had calves, wonderful calves. I really miss those calves. But I ran and ran and ran. And another important part of this story is it's never too late, because I was about 48 or something, 47 when I took up running, which is just ridiculous. But anyway, I became quite passionate, quite obsessed with running. I still love running, although 6 years later I'm very injury prone, and so I'm more of a short distance runner. But I did run a half marathon, and I tell you what, if you want to build relationships with boys and you're a sort of middle-aged woman and you're out there, I'm your English teacher, and, finding things in common with teenage boys, this is a good start. Running. They're just, they'll and footy. And, they feel sorry for me barracking for the Ds. But that is a story. It's never too late. Challenge those sort of gender stereotypes. You can do anything, really. I mean, there'd be a few physical limitations, but if you are prepared to put effort in and time, you can train yourself to do anything. And it was, I love my running. So it's changed my life. And it actually not only changed my life in regard to running, but it made me realise that I could step out of my comfort zone. I did a number of things at the same time, like applying for a different job and doing my master's and moving house. All sorts of things happened at that same time, and I don't think that's just by chance.
It's wonderful, Raelene. It's a great story, and I think it speaks to something that I think everyone loves about you that knows you, is you're just such a genuine and authentic person, passionate about what you do. And I think that's really come through clearly in our conversation today. There's lots of takeaways for us as parents, lots of things to think a bit about. And on behalf of all of us here at Understanding Boys, I just want to thank you again for your time and being on the show today.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was quite enjoyable.
We hope you've enjoyed this Understanding Boys podcast. Make sure you subscribe on your podcast app, and please leave us a review to help grow the community. For more information about the podcast, please visit understandingboys.com.au. Until next time, thanks for listening.